At the family gift exchange, my son opened a crushed box with a used crayon set inside. For half a second, the room went quiet just long enough for everyone to see it. The bent corners, the faded tape, the broken crayons rattling at the bottom. Then my mother smiled. "That's what happens," she said calmly, lifting her glass, "when your mom walks away from the family." Across the room, my sister's kids were tearing open brand new iPhones. Someone laughed, someone filmed. No one looked uncomfortable. My son, Ethan, didn't cry. He just stared at the box, then looked up at me like he was checking whether this was normal, like he was asking me if this was what he deserved. That was the moment I realized I hadn't brought him here for Christmas. I had brought him here to be taught a lesson. So I stood up, walked to the tree, and pulled out a stack of gifts hidden underneath. "These were for them," I said quietly. I met my mother's eyes. "They're not anymore." I hadn't always been the difficult one. In fact, for most of my life, I was the opposite. I was the daughter who learned early how to read the room, the one who noticed when my mother's smile tightened, when my father's voice dropped just enough to signal disappointment. I learned which topics to avoid, which opinions to soften, which parts of myself to hide so dinner could end without tension. In our family, silence was considered maturity. Endurance was praised as loyalty. If something hurt, you were expected to absorb it quietly and move on. That was how love worked, according to my mother Margaret. You stayed. You adjusted. You didn't make things uncomfortable. My sister, Claire, understood that instinctively. She lived 10 minutes away, close enough to stop by without calling. Close enough for my parents to feel entitled to an opinion on everything: how she disciplined her kids, what they ate, which schools they attended, sometimes even how she dressed. Claire would nod, smile, and do whatever she planned to do anyway. And because she stayed within reach, she was rewarded for it: help with groceries, babysitting, money when things were tight, constant reassurance that she was doing a great job. I watched all of that from the inside for years, and every time I tried to set even the smallest boundary, it was treated like a personal attack. When I became a mother, I thought things might change. I thought having my son, Ethan, would soften them, that they'd respect me more, see me as an adult instead of a problem to manage. I was wrong. Every visit turned into a quiet evaluation. Was I feeding him the right foods? Was I too strict? Too soft? Did I really think moving farther away was good for him? Did I really think I could do this on my own? They never yelled. That was the worst part. Everything was delivered calmly, politely, with smiles that made it impossible to argue without looking irrational. I'd drive home afterward with my jaw clenched, replaying conversations in my head, wondering why I always felt smaller when I left than when I arrived. 3 years ago, something finally shifted. It wasn't one big fight. It was a collection of small moments stacked too high to ignore. A comment about Ethan being too sensitive. A joke about how I'd come crawling back. My mother rearranging my kitchen drawers while explaining how much easier my life would be if I listened to her more. So I packed up our things. I found a modest place across town. Nothing impressive. 2 bedrooms, thin walls, a small backyard that Ethan immediately claimed as his own. It was the first space that felt like it belonged to us. When I told my parents I was moving out, my mother sighed like I was exhausting her. My father said I was making things harder than they needed to be. Claire stayed quiet, eyes down, like she didn't want to be seen choosing sides. No one asked me why I needed space. No one asked what I'd been carrying all those years. From that moment on, the story changed. I wasn't the daughter trying to protect her child. I wasn't the woman asking for room to breathe. I was framed as the one who walked away, the one who abandoned the family, the one who thought she was better than everyone else. Every invitation after that came with a subtle edge. Every holiday carried an unspoken test. Was I coming back properly? Was I ready to fall in line again? When my mother invited us to the family gift exchange, I hesitated. Ethan was 9 now, old enough to notice when people talked around him instead of to him. Old enough to feel when something was off, even if he couldn't explain it yet. But he missed his cousins. He missed the idea of grandparents. And a part of me, smaller, quieter, still hopeful, wanted to believe that maybe enough time had passed. Maybe they'd let it go. Maybe Christmas would just be Christmas. I told myself it was one night, a few hours. I could handle that. What I didn't understand then was this. They weren't inviting us back to reconnect. They were inviting us back to remind me of my place. And my son was about to pay the price for a decision I made years ago, one I would never regret, no matter what came next. I noticed the box before Ethan ever touched it. It sat under the tree, pushed slightly to the side, like it didn't quite belong with the rest. The wrapping paper was wrinkled, the corners uneven, the tape cloudy instead of clear. It looked old, reused, forgotten. Ethan didn't see any of that. He was still young enough to believe that a gift was a promise, that if someone gave you something, it meant they cared. He picked it up carefully, holding it with both hands, like it might fall apart if he wasn't gentle. "Is this mine?" he asked, glancing at me. "Yes," my mother said before I could answer. Her tone was light, pleasant, almost cheerful. "Go ahead." I felt my stomach tighten. Ethan sat cross-legged on the rug and peeled the paper back slowly. He always did things that way, carefully, thoughtfully, like he didn't want to ruin the moment. When the box finally came into view, I saw his smile hesitate. It wasn't excitement, it was confusion. The cardboard was crushed on one side, the lid slightly caved in. The label was faded, peeling at the edges. When he opened it, the smell hit first old paper, wax, something faintly greasy. Inside were crayons. Used ones. Some were worn down to stubs. A few were snapped clean in half. One was missing its wrapper entirely, leaving wax residue smeared against the box. For a second, no one said anything. Then I heard it. A small laugh. Not loud. Not cruel enough to call out. Just enough to let me know it was intentional. My mother leaned back against the couch, wine glass in hand, and smiled that familiar smile, the one that never reached her eyes. "Well," she said calmly, "that's what happens when your mom walks away from the family." The words landed harder than I expected. Not because they were new, but because she said them in front of my son. Because she said them like a lesson. Like this was something he needed to understand early. I looked around the room. Claire's kids were already tearing into their gifts. A brand new iPhone. Another phone. Bluetooth headphones? Someone shouted in excitement. Someone else lifted a phone to start recording. "Mom," Claire said half-heartedly, not even looking up. "Don't start." But she didn't stop it either. Ethan stared down at the box in his lap. His fingers curled around the edges, gripping it tighter than necessary. He didn't cry. He didn't complain. He just went quiet in that way. That scared me more than tears ever could. He looked up at me. Not to ask for help, to check my reaction, to see if I was okay with this. That was when I realized something terrible. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't thoughtless. This was planned. A performance disguised as tradition. A message wrapped in paper, thin enough to pretend it was kindness. I felt heat rise in my chest, slow and steady. My first instinct was to smooth it over, to say something gentle, to protect everyone else from discomfort. That instinct had ruled my life for too long. I stood up. The movement was enough to draw attention. Conversations slowed. Someone paused their recording. I walked to the tree. Behind it, partially hidden, was a neat stack of gifts wrapped carefully, tags facing up. I recognized my own handwriting immediately. I had spent weeks picking them out, things Claire's kids had talked about for months, things I'd bought even after I told myself not to overdo it. I lifted the entire stack and carried it into the center of the room. "This is for you," my mother said sharply. "Sophia, sit down." I ignored her. I placed the gifts on the floor, one by one, right where everyone could see them. "These were for them," I said. My voice surprised even me. It didn't shake. It didn't rise. It was steady in a way I hadn't felt in years. "They're not anymore." The room went silent. Claire finally looked at me then, her expression shifting from irritation to disbelief. "Are you serious?" she asked. "You're really doing this right now? In front of everyone?" I turned to her. "You already did it in front of my son." Margaret scoffed. "Oh, don't be dramatic. It was just a joke." I walked back to Ethan and knelt in front of him. "Put the box down," I said softly. He hesitated, then did as I asked. I took his hand and stood up again. "We're leaving," I said. My father rose halfway from his chair. "Sophia, don't overreact." I looked at him for a long moment. This was the part where I usually explained myself. where I tried to sound reasonable enough to be heard. I didn't do that this time. I just turned and walked to the door, my son's hand in mine, the sound of wrapping paper crinkling behind us. No one followed. No one said Merry Christmas. And as the door closed behind us, I knew deep down that whatever I'd just started couldn't be undone. The cold hit us the moment we stepped outside. It wasn't dramatic. No snowstorm. No wind howling through the trees. Just that sharp winter air that burns your lungs on the first breath and reminds you that you're awake. Ethan didn't let go of my hand. We walked to the car in silence. Behind us, the house stayed bright and loud. Laughter leaked through the walls. Someone turned the music up. Christmas went on without us, as if nothing had happened. I opened the passenger door for Ethan. He climbed in, still quiet, still holding himself together in that careful way that kids learn when they don't want to make things worse. As I drove, I waited for him to ask why, or to say he was sorry, or to cry. He didn't. Instead, after a few blocks, he spoke softly. "Mom?" "Yes, baby." "Did I do something wrong?" The question hit harder than anything my mother had said. I pulled over without thinking, just stopped on the side of the road, hazard lights blinking. I turned toward him, my hands shaking as I reached for his face. "No," I said immediately. "No, you did nothing wrong. None of this was your fault." He nodded, but I could tell he was still processing. Kids always are. They don't argue. They just store things away. I started the car again. At home, I tucked him into bed early. He didn't resist. He hugged his pillow tight and asked if we could watch a movie tomorrow. Just us. "Yes," I said. "Anything you want." When his breathing finally evened out, I went back to my car. The gifts were still there, filling the back seat like a reminder I couldn't ignore. I sat behind the wheel for a long time, staring through the windshield, replaying the moment my mother smiled as my son opened that box. The calm in her voice, the certainty. She hadn't been angry. She'd been confident. That scared me more than rage ever could. I drove to the store the next morning. The parking lot was packed with last-minute returns. Couples argued quietly in line. A familiar holiday song played overhead, cheerful and wrong. One by one, I placed the items on the counter. The cashier smiled politely. "Receipts?" I handed them over without hesitation. Each scan felt like a line being erased. Each refund was a decision locking into place. By the time I left, the back seat was empty. When I got home, I made coffee and opened my phone. Netflix first. I stared at the account screen for a second longer than necessary. Multiple profiles. Familiar names. I logged everyone out. Then Spotify, Amazon, the shared grocery app I'd been paying for since before I moved out. The phone plan my parents insisted on, managing for everyone. Click. Confirm. Done. It wasn't revenge. It was boundaries. The first text came just after noon. From my father. "Is the internet down?" I didn't respond. 10 minutes later, another message. "Netflix isn't working." Then my mother called. I let it ring. She left a voicemail, her voice clipped but controlled. "Sophia, something's wrong with our accounts. Call me." I didn't. By mid-afternoon, the tone shifted. Richard called again, this time sounding annoyed. "If you're upset about last night, we can talk like adults. But this is childish." Childish. That word had been used on me my entire life. Anytime I did something they didn't like. I blocked his number. An hour later, Claire texted, "Are you seriously cutting everyone off because of a joke?" I stared at the message, my chest tight. I typed, deleted, retyped. It wasn't a joke to Ethan. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "Mom says you're overreacting." Of course she did. I put my phone face down and focused on making dinner. Something simple, something warm. Ethan talked about school, about a drawing he wanted to finish, about nothing important and everything important at the same time. That night, after he fell asleep, my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Almost. "Hello?" There was a pause on the other end, then a voice I didn't expect to hear so soon. "Sophia," Claire said. Her voice sounded different. Lower, tighter. I don't know where else to go." I sat down slowly. "What happened?" Another pause. "They kicked me out," she said. "Mom and Dad, they said this is my fault, that I let you humiliate the family." I closed my eyes. They said I need to learn consequences, she continued. That if I'm choosing your side, I can figure things out on my own. I pictured my sister always close to them, always safe, suddenly standing outside the circle she'd never questioned. Where are you? I asked. A motel? She said quietly. The kids are asleep. I didn't hesitate. Come here, I said. There was silence. Then disbelief. Are you serious? Yes. But after everything? Claire, I said gently. Bring the kids. We'll figure it out. When I hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time. Walking out of that house had felt like a line in the sand. But this was the moment I realized they weren't just punishing me. They were testing how far they could go. And I was done letting them decide the rules. They arrived just after midnight. I heard the car before I heard the knock, an engine idling too long, a door closing softly, like someone hoping not to be noticed. When I opened the front door, Claire was standing on the porch with 2 backpacks and a plastic grocery bag that had torn at the bottom. Her kids stood behind her, half asleep, rubbing their eyes. For a second, none of us moved. Then Ethan appeared at my side. Aunt Claire? He asked quietly. She nodded, and something in her face cracked. I stepped aside and let them in. No one cried. No one apologized. There was no dramatic reunion. Just exhaustion, settling into the room like a heavy fog. I made tea, laid out blankets, showed the kids where the bathroom was. They followed instructions without complaint, like they already knew this wasn't a situation they were allowed to make harder. Claire sat at the kitchen table while I poured hot water into mugs. She didn't look like herself. No makeup, no sharp tone, no phone in her hand. Just a woman staring at a chip tabletop, shoulders slumped, fingers wrapped tightly around a mug she hadn't touched yet. I didn't know, she said finally. I waited. I didn't know they'd do that, she continued, her voice low. To him, to Ethan. I nodded once. I didn't think they'd do it to me either, she added. That was the moment the room changed. Because that sentence wasn't about surprise. It was about realization. We didn't talk much that night. There was nothing to resolve yet. Just the quiet understanding that something had shifted and couldn't be shifted back. The next morning, the calls started again. Different numbers this time. Voicemails only. My mother's voice was calm, controlled, almost soothing. Sophia, your sister is manipulating you now too. You've always been too easily influenced. Another message followed minutes later. You're choosing the wrong side, and I hope you're happy when this blows up in your face. I saved them all. Then my father called. He spoke slowly, carefully, like he was explaining something to a child. This has gone far enough, he said. Families fight. That's normal. But punishing everyone over a misunderstanding is unreasonable. A misunderstanding. That word again. I didn't call back. On the 4th day, he showed up. No warning, no text. Just Richard standing on my porch, hands in his coat pockets, looking past me into my house like he still had the right. I opened the door halfway. What do you want? I asked. He didn't answer that. Instead, he glanced inside, eyes scanning the hallway, the living room, the couch where Claire's kids were sitting quietly with coloring books. He frowned. You shouldn't have let her stay, he said. I laughed once, short and sharp. You mean after you threw her out? She needed consequences, he replied. She embarrassed the family. I felt my chest tighten. And humiliating my son was necessary too? I asked. He shrugged. That box was meant to teach humility, he said. Kids today expect too much. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Not because I didn't have words, but because I finally understood that nothing I said would matter. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was ideology. I looked at him for a long time. Then I did something I'd never done before. I closed the door. No yelling. No final argument. No explanation. Just the door. When I turned around, Claire was standing in the hallway. She hadn't meant to listen, but she had. Her face looked hollow, not angry. Like something had been emptied out of her. She handed me her phone. Read this, she said. It was a message thread with our mother. Screens and screens of it. Accusations. Guilt. Threats wrapped in concern. My mother telling Claire she was ungrateful. That she raised her kids wrong. That she'd ruined everything by siding with me. That she should be ashamed. I scrolled slowly. This wasn't new language. It was just finally visible. They always said blood mattered more than anything, Claire said quietly. But I think what they really meant was control. That night, after the kids were asleep, we sat at the kitchen table with 2 cups of tea growing cold between us. No phones, no television, just the hum of the fridge and the sound of the house settling. We talked about things we'd never said out loud. About how approval was earned and withdrawn like currency. About how love always came with conditions. About how holidays felt less like celebrations and more like tests we were always failing. We didn't forgive each other for everything. Not yet. But we stopped pretending, nothing hurt. And somewhere in that conversation, something quiet but permanent locked into place. We weren't going back. The problem was, once our parents realized they'd lost control of both of us at the same time, they didn't try to fix anything. They started planning how to punish us instead. The house felt different after that. Not broken, not chaotic, careful. Like everyone was walking softly through a space that might collapse if we breathed the wrong way. Claire and her kids settled into the guest room without complaint. No entitlement, no demands. She folded blankets the way our mother used to, tight, precise, muscle memory from a lifetime of trying to do things right. Ethan gave up his room without a word and moved to the couch, treating it like an adventure. I let him. He deserved to feel generous instead of small. For 3 days there was peace. Real peace. No raised voices, no accusations, no constant vigilance. Just quiet mornings, shared meals, and the strange relief that comes when you realize no one is watching you anymore. Then the water stopped running. I noticed it first when I tried to wash dishes. The faucet coughed once, then went silent. I checked the bathroom. Same thing. Every tap in the house was dry. At first, I assumed it was an outage. I grabbed my phone and called the utility company, already rehearsing how I'd explain the inconvenience to the kids. But the woman on the line didn't sound surprised. There was a cancellation request, she said. My stomach dropped. A request made last week, she continued. By the account holder. Frayed and there's take for cast. That's not possible, I said. I didn't cancel anything. She paused. The caller verified your information. I sat down slowly. Someone had impersonated me. I went down to the office in person with my ID, hands still shaking, and got the service restored. While I was there, I asked them to flag the account, add extra verification, document everything. On the way home, I checked the power company. There was a pending request to disconnect service by the end of the week. Same method, same timing. I didn't say anything to the kids. That night, I made pancakes for dinner, ran the bath early while the water still worked, acted like everything was normal. Inside, something was burning. Only a handful of people had ever had access to those accounts. Only 2 of them had just been cut off financially and emotionally at the same time. I spent the next day on the phone, changing passwords, adding security questions, moving everything fully under my name, locking down accounts I'd once left open because I trusted the wrong people. When I finally told Claire, she didn't look shocked. She stared at the wall for a moment, then let out a humorless laugh. They always said if you make your bed, you lie in it, she said quietly. I guess they're hoping we lie in it cold and in the dark. I laughed too, because if I didn't, I might have screamed. That night, while I was finishing dishes, Claire stepped outside to take a call. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. When she came back in, her face was pale, her mouth set in a straight line like she was holding something together by force. They cut me off, she said. From what? I asked, though I already knew. Everything, she replied. Bank accounts, credit cards, insurance. Dad just texted. You're on your own now. Figure it out. She sank into a chair. They were paying for my car, she whispered. Groceries, health insurance. I didn't even realize how much until it was gone. She didn't cry. She just stared at the table like the ground beneath her had disappeared. The next morning, her oldest, Hannah, came into the kitchen holding an envelope. I found this in my backpack, she said. It wasn't mailed. It wasn't signed. Just printed. A letter from my parents. It said that until her mother repented, she was not to contact them. That they were reevaluating their relationships with all grandchildren. That they were setting boundaries. She was 11 years old. That was when Claire broke. Not loudly. Not in front of the kids. Behind a closed bathroom door. I heard it anyway. I took action. I added her to my health plan, transferred money so she could buy groceries without checking her balance, made sure the kids had winter coats that fit. She didn't ask. She never would have. When my parents found out, because, of course they did, the response was immediate. They blocked me on everything. Numbers, emails, social media. One final email came through before that door closed too. You chose her. Don't come crying when she ruins you. I stared at it for a long time. Then I deleted it. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I finally understood what it meant. They thought they were cutting me off. What they were actually doing was freeing me. They didn't realize it yet, but the story had already moved past the point where they controlled the ending. And the next part? The next part was coming faster than they expected. The first sign that things were about to change didn't come from my parents. It came from my phone. I was standing in the frozen foods aisle at the grocery store, staring at two nearly identical boxes of waffles, when my screen lit up with a message from my aunt. Are you really not coming to the party? I frowned. What party? I typed back. Her response came seconds later, a screenshot. A New Year's Eve invitation. Full catering. Live DJ. Champagne at midnight. Hosted at my parents' house. Everyone invited. Aunts, uncles, cousins, old neighbors, church friends, everyone but me. Another message followed. They said you weren't welcome. That you cut the family off and they're setting boundaries now. I felt something cold settle in my chest. I didn't care about the party. I cared about the story they were telling. That I'd stormed out over nothing. That I'd refused to help Claire. That I'd returned gifts out of spite. That I was unstable, difficult, dangerous. I looked down at Ethan, crouched beside the cart, carefully debating whether strawberry or mango popsicles were the better choice. He had no idea his grandparents were rewriting his childhood in real time. That night, my inbox started filling up. Old friends, distant relatives, people I hadn't spoken to in years. Most of them didn't say much. I saw the video. I'm so sorry. That was cruel. Video? My heart skipped. Someone no one ever admitted who had posted footage from the gift exchange. Not just a clip, a longer edit. It showed Claire's kids opening their brand new electronics. Then it cut to Ethan, sitting cross-legged on the rug, pulling used crayons from a crushed box. The caption read, "This is how some families treat the ones who choose peace." By morning, it had spread further than I ever expected. People weren't angry. They were quiet. And that silence spoke louder than outrage ever could. A message came in from Carla, my mother's oldest friend. The one who never missed a party. The one who always brought the fancy cheese board and stayed late to help clean up. Your parents have been saying a lot, she wrote. But no one's really listening anymore. Then, just before midnight on New Year's Eve, she sent another message. A photo. My parents' living room. Tables set for 30, plates untouched, lights half off. The DJ standing awkwardly in the corner with his equipment still packed. Only 4 people came, she added. They left before 10. I stared at the image longer than I should have. Not because I felt vindicated, but because I saw it clearly now. They hadn't been protecting the family's image all these years. They'd been hiding behind it. The next few days were strangely calm. No calls, no messages, no threats. Just silence. The kind that isn't peaceful but strategic. Then the letter arrived. Not mailed, not signed. Typed. Printed. Folded neatly. It accused me of turning Ethan against his family. Of feeding him a narrative of division. Of raising him to be emotionally manipulative. It ended with a warning. One day, he'll resent you for this. They always do. I didn't show it to Ethan. I folded it in half and threw it away. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I recognized it for what it was. A final attempt to wound me where they thought I was weakest. And it didn't work. That week, I spoke to a lawyer. Not to sue. Not to escalate. To protect. We documented everything. The impersonation calls. The account tampering. The letters. The messages. The attempts to isolate and control. I learned words I'd never needed before. Harassment. Coercion. Fraud. I didn't want revenge. I wanted safety. When my parents realized I wasn't responding anymore, not emotionally, not defensively, not at all, they tried one last time to regain control. They blocked me. Everywhere. Emails. Numbers. Social media. As if silence was something they could still use against me. They sent one final message before disappearing completely. You chose her. Don't come crying when she ruins you too. I read it once. Then I deleted it. And something inside me finally unclenched. They thought they were cutting me off. What they didn't understand was this: they'd already lost. Not because people turned against them, but because people stepped back. And once the curtain was pulled aside, there was no applause left to chase. That night we celebrated New Year's at home. No guests, no spectacle. Dollar store lights, paper hats, root beer floats, a tiny cake Claire baked herself, the frosting slightly melted from the oven heat. At midnight, we counted down together in the living room, watching fireworks on a live stream we could barely hear over our own laughter. When the clock struck 12, Ethan threw his arms around my waist. "I like this," he said. "It feels quiet." I held him close. "So do I said. And for the first time since all of this began, I knew the worst was over. Because the truth was out. The control was gone. And the ending? The ending was finally ours to write. January arrived without ceremony. No calls, no messages, no sudden apologies dressed up as concern. Just silence, thick, deliberate, and unmistakably final. For the first time, it wasn't something being used against me. It was simply there, like fresh snow after a storm, covering everything that had been broken. The house settled into a new rhythm. Mornings started earlier than before. Coffee brewed while the kids shuffled around in mismatched socks. Claire learned the layout of my kitchen by heart, moving through it like someone trying not to leave fingerprints. She washed dishes before anyone asked, folded laundry with careful precision. Old habits, unlearning themselves slowly. Ethan kept sleeping on the couch for a while, even after I offered his room back. "It's okay," he said one morning. "I like being close." So I let him. We started small traditions. Pancakes on Saturdays, movie nights where everyone voted and no one complained when they lost, walks after dinner, even when it was cold enough to sting our cheeks, just to remind ourselves that the world still existed beyond our walls. Claire began to change too. Not dramatically, not all at once. She flinched less when her phone buzzed, stopped checking it every few minutes like she was waiting for something bad to happen. One afternoon, she admitted something she'd never said out loud. "I didn't realize how much of my life was being managed," she said. "Not guided, managed." We talked about practical things, budgets, boundaries, next steps. I helped her update her resume. She applied for remote work, nothing glamorous, but steady. A few weeks later, she got a part-time position. When she told me, she tried to downplay it, but her hands were shaking. "It's a start," she said. "It's freedom," I corrected gently. We didn't tell the kids everything. They didn't need the details. They just needed consistency, safety, proof that adults could handle hard things without turning it into a spectacle. Ethan stopped asking about his grandparents. Not right away, but gradually, like a question that had lost its urgency. One night, as I tucked him in, he asked, "Are we doing another Christmas with them?" "No," I said honestly. "We're starting something new." He thought about that for a moment, then nodded. "Can we make cinnamon rolls instead?" "Yes," I said, smiling. "We can." That answer seemed to satisfy him completely. There were moments when the anger tried to come back. When I found an old photo. When a song played that reminded me of holidays that hadn't always been this complicated. When I wondered if there would ever be a real apology, or if silence was all I'd ever get. But then I'd remember the sound of Ethan's voice in the living room, Claire laughing in the kitchen, the way the house felt at night unwatched, unjudged, and the anger loosened its grip. I kept documenting things. Emails saved, dates logged, notes organized neatly in a folder I hoped I'd never need. My lawyer checked in once, then less often. There were no new incidents, no attempts to interfere. Control, it turns out, doesn't survive neglect. People who rely on reaction wither when they're met with none. By the second week of January, it was clear my parents weren't going to break the silence. Not with me, not with Claire, not even with the kids. No birthday messages, no checking in, nothing. At first, that absence felt loud. Then it felt revealing. They wanted the story of being wronged more than they wanted a relationship, and that truth, once seen, couldn't be unseen. One evening, Claire and I sat on the porch after the kids had gone to bed. The sky was heavy with winter clouds, the air still and blue-gray. I used to think love meant staying no matter what, she said quietly. So did I replied. We sat there for a while, not talking, just listening to the quiet. It wasn't perfect. Nothing was. But it was honest. And honesty, I was learning, didn't need permission. By the time February approached, the house felt less like a shelter and more like a home. A place built not on obligation, but on choice. We weren't healed, but we were healing. And that, for the first time in a very long time, felt like enough. By the time winter began to loosen its grip, something inside our house had settled. Not everything was fixed. Not everything was easy. But the constant tension, the sense that we were waiting for the next blow, was gone. In its place was something quieter and stronger. Certainty. January turned into February. Then March. No calls came. No apologies. No dramatic attempts at reconciliation. My parents held their silence like a badge of honor, convinced it proved something. Maybe it did. It proved that control mattered more to them than connection. One afternoon, while the kids were doing homework at the table, Claire came into the living room holding her phone, eyes wide. I got offered more hours, she said. Still remote. Still flexible. I stood up and hugged her before she could say anything else. She laughed, surprised, then laughed harder. Not the brittle kind of laughter she used to have, the one that came with a defensive edge, but something real. Later that week, we talked about next steps. Saving. Planning. Independence. Claire didn't rush it. Neither did I. We had learned what happened when people were pushed before they were ready. Ethan changed too. Not in obvious ways. He didn't suddenly become louder or more confident overnight. But the questions stopped coming. The careful glances. The habit of checking my face before reacting. One night, as I was turning off the lights, he said, "Mom?" "Yes." "I'm glad we left." I sat down on the edge of the couch. "Me too," I said. He thought for a moment. "I don't think that box was really about crayons." I smiled sadly. "No, it wasn't. But it's okay," he continued, "because now we don't have to go back." And just like that, he had said the thing I'd been trying to put into words for months. We didn't go back. Not for Easter. Not for birthdays. Not for second chances disguised as obligations. We built new traditions instead. Sunday dinners where no one criticized how the food was made. Holidays that felt calm instead of competitive. Celebrations without scorekeeping. There were still hard days. Moments when grief crept in unexpectedly, not for what was lost, but for what never really existed in the first place. That kind of grief is strange. It doesn't announce itself. It shows up quietly, asking to be acknowledged. I let it. And then I let it go. Because here's the truth I learned the hard way. Walking away doesn't make you weak. Staying in a place that harms your child does. Protecting your peace isn't selfish. Setting boundaries isn't cruel. Choosing safety over approval isn't betrayal. It's responsibility. My parents thought they were teaching me a lesson that night with a crushed box of used crayons. What they didn't realize was that they were teaching me something else entirely. They showed me exactly who they were when no one was watching. And they gave me the clarity I needed to stop hoping for a version of them that was never coming. We weren't cut off. We were released. And in that release, we found something better than acceptance. We found each other. So if you're listening to this and wondering whether walking away makes you the villain in someone else's story, let me say this. You are allowed to leave places where love comes with conditions. You are allowed to protect your children from lessons rooted in shame. You are allowed to build a family based on choice, not fear. Sometimes the ending you're afraid of is actually the beginning you've been waiting for. And sometimes, all it takes is one small broken box to finally see it clearly.